Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chen and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with another reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine, Volume 5, also known as Tang Jiu by Tang Jiu Qing. And we're starting with chapter 162, so I hope you all enjoy and let's go ahead and dig in. Chapter 162, Trade Market. The deep blue dome of heaven spread out behind Shen Zichuan. He removed his cloak, exposing the earring on his right ear as he lifted his arms. His robe's cuffs slid down to reveal the secured, white snow sleeves of his inner garment. He was a white bird touching down for a rest in this still and silent world, commanding all of Xiao Chuye's attention in an instant. Xiao Chuye didn't even blink. He watched Shen Zichuan descend the bank in a few steps and unthinkingly opened his arms. Shen Zichuan rushed into his embrace. The impact sent him stumbling back half a step. He took his white bird into his bosom, crushing him in a tight hug. The swift running water clashed into their legs, sending up sprays of water. You scared me. Recovering from his astonishment, Xiao Chuye lifted Shen Zichuan high and threw his head back to laugh. You fell from the sky. Shen Zichuan was a little short of breath. I'm here for an inspection. Xiao Chuye lifted his hand to Shen Zichuan's cheek, then slid it to the back of Shen Zichuan's head and held him still for a kiss. Dusk closed in on the mountains and waters around them, their lips holding the last warmth of the evening glow. Shen Zichuan's hands came up to cup Xiao Chuye's cheeks as he responded passionately. The shimmer on the surface of the water faded, and the gathering darkness blurred the boundary between heaven and earth. They clung close, ever so intimate as they unburdened themselves of their desperate loneliness. Xiao Chuye kissed him so hard, Shen Zichuan sucked in a breath when they parted, licking the spot nearly torn by Xiao Chuye's sharp canines. Inspect away, Xiao Chuye laughed. Go on, I've already stripped for you. Draping his arms around Xiao Chuye's neck, Shen Zichuan tapped his sturdy back with his dangling fan. I disappeared without a trace the moment I stepped off the carriage. I haven't even met his lordship. I'll inspect you tonight. Aha. Xiao Chuye dragged out the word and held Shen Zichuan right where he wanted him. Bitterly, he said, So you're here to see my father? Shen Zichuan swung his folding fan. That's just something I have to do along the way. My heart is all here. Carrying Shen Zichuan, Xiao Chuye waded through the water toward the riverbank. I don't believe you. Shen Zichuan felt that Xiao Chuye looked especially dashing this way. When Xiao Chuye set him down, he leaned back to gaze at him. Xiao Chuye placed his palm against Shen Zichuan's forehead and stretched out his arm to put a little distance between them. You should have seized the opportunity while you had it. Xiao Chuye bent down for his clothes. That's all I'm showing you. Then I suppose I'll be leaving, Shen Zichuan teased. Xiao Chuye picked up his robe and jerked his chin toward the hill. Go ahead. Shen Zichuan nodded and took a few small steps backward. Seeing that Xiao Chuye didn't budge, he turned around in earnest, but before he had taken a full stride forward, Xiao Chuye pulled him back, covering his head with the robe and kissing him until a tingle ran up Shen Zichuan's spine. The wide robe that enveloped them was covered in Xiao Chuye's scent, the cool and refreshing fragrance engulfing Shen Zichuan. In the darkness afforded by that thin film of fabric, he revealed his avaricious nature, breathing hotly to seduce Xiao Chuye before finally whispering in his ear, Your father is coming. The group of well-meaning guards who had been squatting tactfully behind the slope started coughing loudly. Xiao Chuye pulled back in the nick of time, tearing the robe off them both in a fit of pique. Xiao Fengshu had long known of Shen Zichuan's arrival, but he hadn't communicated this fact to Xiao Chuye. The main tent was crowded with people now. The commanding generals from Base Camp, Second Sand Camp, and the Liu'er camps were all present, in the midst of discussing news from the homeland. If the Biansha troops don't withdraw soon, This war will go into the winter. The commanding general of 2nd Sand Camp was a man named Jiang Sheng. He'd been wounded some days back, and his shoulders were still wrapped in gauze. If we're going to keep up our current momentum through the winter, we need to consider deploying more craftsmen to the battalions on the front lines. We can't move fast enough if we have to rely on the supply squadron to deliver fresh equipment every time ours wears down. Deploying more craftsmen is an option. Zuo Qianqiu was warming himself by the fire. But we'll also need to feed them. If we transfer everyone to the front lines, there will be no one back at home to till the fields next spring. Now that Libe had lost access to Jeshi's granaries, its provisions were cut in half. They had to rely on the military fields in Libe to survive. The ability to feed their soldiers was something that would determine success or failure in battle. The heir has suggested establishing a new supply camp behind 2nd Sand Camp, Zhao Hui said. This will allow us to assist the border camp to the south and meet the needs of the front lines faster. In times of emergency, our people back home will skimp and save to supply the front line. Winter is around the corner, and the coats have yet to be distributed. Jiang Sheng knew everyone was in a difficult position. He couldn't push too hard. He frowned in silence for a moment. The heir consort is leading the old and infirm, plus all the women and children, to hasten the production of winter coats back in the homeland. The cotton used to fill them was given to us by Luoxia Pass. We're in for a tough time this year. If we can't survive this winter, we can forget about plans for next year. You're a veteran general. Xiao Fangxu took a drink from his cup of hot milk. Don't lose heart. The men on the front lines are still fighting. If it's rough going for us, it'll be even tougher on the 12 tribes of Biansha. Amur still hasn't become their great king. Out of the 12, only 6 tribes have truly pledged allegiance to him. The remaining tribes are merely hoping for a share of the spoils. They'll take the risk with him for now, but when it comes down to it, they may not be willing to stake everything on him. Biansha has the momentum this year, Zhao Hui said. They've surely come prepared. No doubt they've been planning this push for a long time. Zuo Qianqiu turned his palms over and looked down before continuing. In the 3rd year of Shande, Amur colluded with our own ministers and broke through Zhongbo's defenses. Everything went too smoothly for him then. He had a true taste of victory. It's surprising that he's concentrating his attacks on a difficult territory like Libe. But from this, we can guess he's harboring real intentions of invading Greizhou. This time, he wants to first destroy the wall that is Libe to prevent himself from getting caught the same way. Someone out there is supplying grain to Amur. Xiao Fangxu's eyes were sharp. When Jimin was taken out of commission thanks to the moldy provisions, Amur transferred Hassan north immediately. If you told me he didn't know in advance, I wouldn't believe you. Amur's contact is still hiding in Greizhou. We can thank our lucky stars Chudu doesn't have Libe's military maps. Aya rebelled at the start of spring. This was no bad thing. In fact, he did well. If Libe had remained under Chudu's control, we'd be worrying about more than provisions right now. It's easier to dodge a spear in the open than ward off an arrow in the dark, and trusting our backs to Chudu is too dangerous. Jiang Sheng finally revealed a hint of a smile, shaking his head. With no more Inspector eunuchs breathing down our necks, it's been a much more satisfying fight. The provisions issue is one that can be solved. Xiao Fangxu set down his bowl, and I found just the man to solve it. Zuo Qianqiu laughed and rose to his feet. All right, then. Let me invite this good friend of yours in. It took all of Wu Ziyu's discipline not to brazenly stare at Shen Zichuan. I know he's so beautiful, right? Squashing his curiosity, he followed behind Tan Tai-hu and asked, Is that him? Just address him as Gongzi later, Tan Tai-hu whispered back. Shen Zichuan's head was tilted as he listened to Fei Sheng. Wu Ziyu couldn't tell from his side profile if Shen Zichuan was happy or not, but simply standing there, he resembled a portrait limned in brilliant colors. The base was pure white, yet the delicate hues of his features were so ravishing they held the viewer in thrall. One didn't dare shift their eyes away, but looking too long inexplicably gave one a chill. It wasn't an oppressive coldness, It merely raced up one's spine, so swift it gave no indication of its advance. By the time realization dawned, the viewer instinctively sensed danger and shied away from his cutting brilliance. Ding Tao was, as ever, a chatterbox. He popped out his head to whisper, "See that jade earring? Our master polished it personally. Gongzi wears it every day." The jade drop adorned his right ear. Whether Shan Zichuan was the one who became the jade earring, or whether it became him, it was a matter still up for debate. Its presence was a needless warning, its smooth luster concealing Xiao Chirye's naked possessiveness, announcing to the world that no one other than Xiao Chirye could touch this man. Wu Ziyu had only just burrowed through the crowd. He hadn't yet decided how he should greet Shan Zichuan, but seeing as everyone around him behaved as they normally did, he did the same, his prying gaze warded off by that small white earring. By the time Shan Zichuan arrived to meet with Xiao Fengshu, it was nearing midnight. Chen Yang lifted the tent flap to let him enter. Xiao Fengshu was initially sitting with one leg propped on the other, but when he saw that figure in white step inside, he immediately sat up straight. Then, feeling he was acting too unnatural, he attempted to cover it up by bracing his hands on his knees to appear more imposing as he looked sternly over at Shan Zichuan. "Apologies for keeping you waiting." Zuo Qianqiu guided Shan Zichuan to a seat. "It's a tough journey here. Come, have a meal with us first. We'll talk as we eat." He turned his head and shot Xiao Fengshu a meaningful glance. Xiao Fengshu scrutinized Shan Zichuan. He remembered this face, but the aura that accompanied it was entirely different from the young man he had seen just a year ago. He thought. "Sit," Xiao Fengshu said coolly. Gu Jing served tea, and Chen Yang brought out the food. It was a simple meal. A large platter of lamb stew, tea mixed with fresh milk, piping hot flatbread, and cabbage and other green vegetables commonly seen at the front lines. Shan Zichuan stared at the portions laid out before him. They had clearly overestimated him. Zuo Qianqiu gestured for Shan Zichuan to dig in as he tore into his own flatbread. "It's army food, I'm afraid. We wanted to welcome you with a meal, but we've not much to offer, so this will have to do. If we can establish a truce with Biansha next year, we'll host you properly back in the homeland." Shan Zichuan found this comment strange. He was here to discuss the Libei trade market and the use of Libei's roads. Since Xiao Fengshu was willing to meet him, no matter how he looked at it, their hospitality was perfectly adequate. "It's been half a year since we saw each other. When we met in Chudu the last time, you weren't so thin," Zuo Qianqiu said. "Is your Shifu well?" Shan Zichuan hadn't yet touched the food. He nodded and replied, "Shifu has been in good health and leads a leisurely life in Suzhou. He thinks of you often. Before I came, he specially instructed me to deliver a letter on his behalf." He turned back and called, "Fei Sheng." Fei Sheng handed the letter over to Chen Yang. As Zuo Qianqiu and Shan Zichuan exchanged pleasantries, Xiao Fengshu sliced off a piece of lamb with a dagger. "So you're here to discuss the trade market?" "That's right," Shan Zichuan replied. "I also wanted to speak to your lordship about the roads." "Access to Libei's roads will not be granted for free." Xiao Fengshu placed the lamb on his plate. "You're welcome to use them as long as you can afford the price, but the trade market is not open to outsiders." "If your lordship doesn't permit outsiders to participate in the trade market, it will be left vacant this year." Shan Zichuan tasted the flatbread before continuing. "The fighting is intense this year, and the grasslands of the Huiyan tribe that participates in your market have been commandeered by the Hanma tribe. The Huiyan tribe is waiting to exchange their remaining cattle and sheep for grain at the trade market just to get through the winter. If the trade market doesn't open, thousands will starve to death in the snow." The fact that Libei is willing to vacate land for the Huiyan tribe to graze their livestock is already a magnanimous gesture, Xiao Fengshu replied. "They know we're in a difficult spot this year." He wiped the dagger clean and looked at Shan Zichuan. "Do you know what it means to let you into the trade market?" "It would mean your men would move freely in and out of Libei this whole winter. We are at war. If any of the Mount Luo bandits who defected to Biansha find their way in, are you bold enough to bear the consequences?" "I'm not." Shan Zichuan looked straight into Xiao Fangshu's eyes, "which is why I will eliminate all possibility of it." Xiao Fangshu tossed the dagger onto his tray. "Don't say things like that to me. I don't believe it." "What if I gave your lordship the authority to inspect everything that passes through?" Shan Zichuan grasped his handkerchief and slowly smiled. "Suzhou will provide the grain, and Li Bei will have the final say over how it's delivered." "What do you want in exchange?" Xiao Fangshu asked, grave. "This still isn't a good deal for you." "I want a road." Shan Zichuan raised a finger and drew a line in the air. "A commercial trade route that runs through the northeastern territories of Great Zhou, one that will allow Li Bei and Suzhou to establish a long-term partnership, secure sufficient provisions for the Li Bei armored cavalry, and keep the northeast provisions trails flowing smoothly." Xiao Fangshu didn't respond. On the other side of the tent, the flap lifted, and Xiao Chiye entered. Chapter 163. Boat on a River. Shan Zichuan's gaze lingered on Xiao Chiye's body, an imperceptible tease. It lasted a split second, so fast Xiao Chiye only caught that last instance of it. "And what does Li Bei get out of letting you into the trade market?" Xiao Fangshu wiped his hands clean. "Li Bei doesn't depend on trade for survival." In the past, the noble clans adopted a strategy of making a distant friend while attacking a nearby enemy in order to hold Li Bei in check. Li Bei has no friend on its southern border, leaving it vulnerable and cut off from assistance. "I'm willing to connect Zhongbo and Li Bei once more and serve as a buffer zone between Li Bei and Qidong," Shan Zichuan said. "Li Bei is in a dangerous, protracted war with Biansha. It's safer to have Zhongbo as an ally." Xiao Chiye sat down next to Xiao Fangshu. Chen Yang presented him with a new pair of chopsticks, and he picked a piece of lamb off the plate. Really quick, I wonder if he's going to push some food over to Shan Zichuan, because he hasn't eaten yet. Xiao Fangshu cast him a sidelong glance, then turned his attention back to Shan Zichuan. "You are not Shen Wei, the Prince of Jianxing. Your words don't represent the 6 prefectures of Zhongbo. You snatched Suzhou from Zhou Gui's hands using the excuse of passing through, and you subdued Luo Mu's Chazhou under the pretext of delivering grain. But King Yi of Fanzhou and Dengzhou, as well as the bandits of Mount Luo in Duanzhou and Duanzhou, are not under your control." Regarding this, Shan Zichuan already had a scheme in mind. King Yi is a commoner pushed to rebellion by the bandits. Between Fanzhou and Dengzhou, he has less than 30,000 troops. He can't defeat the Biansha horsemen to the east, and he doesn't have the guts to face Tijuying to the south. He can only set up a miniature imperial court in Fanzhou and attempt to ally with the bandits from Mount Luo. The man is a paper tiger. He only looks fierce. As for the Mount Luo bandits, they're mired in internal strife. They no longer pose a credible threat to Zhongbo. In any case, neither they nor King Yi will negotiate with Li Bei. Only Suzhou comes with a sincere heart. The trade route between Huaizhou, Suzhou, and Chazhou is already taking shape, allowing Suzhou to bypass Chudu to conduct monetary transactions with Jueshi. If Li Bei needs, Suzhou can cover the operating costs of the entire northeast provisions trail. Xiao Fangshu and Suo Qianqiu thought at the same time. As long as the Northeast Provisions Trail was operational, Zhongbo could supply Li Bei with military provisions. Shan Zichuan's greatest assets in Jueshi lay in the Xi clan's businesses. He had been set on using the Northeast Provisions Trail before he ever left Chudu. The military provisions case had brought to light the embezzlement of grain in Jueshi, but it had also shown Shan Zichuan a loophole. In the past, Xi Hongxuan routed grain through the Hezhou waterways and was obstructed by the Hua clan of Dicheng to the north. But now that Shan Zichuan had Huaizhou's cooperation, he could purchase grain directly from Jueshi. On another note, Shan Zichuan said, changing the subject, I had hoped the newly established garrison troops of the 6 prefectures might receive guidance from the Li Bei armored cavalry and purchase battle steeds from the Hongyan Mountains in the future. This time, it was not only Xiao Fangshu who looked toward him. Even Xiao Chuye turned his head. You want to establish a cavalry? Xiao Fengshu's interest was piqued. In Zhongbo, along the Chashi River. Shen Zichuan took a sip of the hot milk to warm himself. Duanzhou needs a cavalry. Most of Zhongbo had no natural grasslands for grazing. The garrisons of the 6 prefectures comprised mainly infantry, but Zhongbo's terrain didn't enjoy the same natural geographical advantage as Tidong, which relied on the 2 cinch points of Tianfei Watchtower and Suotian Pass for protection. The land along the Chashi River was open and exposed, and the line of defense Duanzhou had established there couldn't withstand the repeated incursions of the Biansha horsemen. The rebuilding of these military defenses was long overdue. My elder brother's name was Jimu, Shen Zichuan said. He was a squad commander in the Duanzhou garrison troops when the Biansha horsemen attacked. He paused. He was familiar with the area along the Chashi River. Like Libei, it's a wide expanse of flatlands. The defensive camps there at the time didn't have the beacon towers of the Bianzhuan commandery, which stretched for tens of thousands of li, nor did they have the falcon reconnaissance of Libei. When the Biansha horsemen forded the river, there was no time for the defenders to pass on any message at all. This was one of the principal reasons for the fall of Duanzhou. The relay horses along the public roads couldn't outrun the Biansha horsemen. They were slaughtered en route to their destinations. With no one to communicate military intelligence, the cities behind Duanzhou received no news. They didn't learn of the attack until the city's gates were broken down and the Biansha horsemen's scimitars were right in their faces. What had followed was the massacre of the cities. Jimu had died with a grievance. All 30,000 garrison soldiers in the Chashi sinkhole had died unjust deaths. They had possessed the determination to die protecting their home and country, but they'd never had the opportunity. Heavy snow had blanketed the Chashi sinkhole. From then on, the men of Zhongbo had become the stray dogs of the Zhou Empire. Duanzhou needs a light cavalry, Shen Zichuan said firmly. After the defeat, the area along the Chashi River fell into the hands of the Biansha people. Whatever was left of Duanzhou's defensive camps lapsed into disuse. To rebuild them, Duanzhou must have a light cavalry. Xiao Fengshu stroked his chin. If you only want to pass military information efficiently, there are plenty of options. Re-establish a dense enough cluster of relay stations along the Chashi River and build smooth enough roads for the horses, and you can be as swift as you please. But if you want a light cavalry that can rival the Biansha horsemen, Libei can't help you. Zuo Tianqiu nodded and addressed Shen Zichuan. The Biansha horsemen's fierce strength lies not only in their speed, but in their horsemanship. They're adept riders, more so than any of Great Zhou's soldiers. Even the Libei armored cavalry cannot compare to this. You should know, a Duanzhou that relinquishes its defenses is no better than an infant in swaddling clothes. Xiao Fengshu agreed. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Xiao Chuye stealthily push a plate of meat towards Shen Zichuan. He stumped on his son's foot under the table. I think it's feasible. The hell do you know? Xiao Fengshu grumbled. Xiao Chuye twisted his thumb ring around twice. In this case, I do know something. He looked toward Shen Zichuan again and felt a subtle itch when their gazes met. He knew exactly what Shen Zichuan was thinking. Why must this light cavalry compare to the Biansha horsemen? Xiao Chuye asked. Even if we remove the Libei armored cavalry's heavy armor from our horses, we won't achieve the same results as them. He felt a little lethargic after eating his fill. Lanzhou also has the embroidered uniform guard at his command. Using them purely as eyes and ears is too great a waste. But if you paired the highly trained embroidered uniform guard with the best horses, they'd have a chance at breaking through Biansha's defenses along the Chashi River. How many men are in the embroidered uniform guard? Xiao Fengshu scoffed. On the battlefield, their numbers are like a strand of hair on an ox. The embroidered uniform guard in Suzhou can be expanded. And consider this organization's selection criteria. Not only does Lanzhou have the most efficient intelligence gatherers in Great Zhou, he also has assassins adept in the art of camouflage at his disposal, Xiao Chuye said. Are small numbers a shortcoming? Not always. For a light cavalry of assassins, being small in number is to their advantage. Rather than calling them a strand of hair on an ox, call them a steel needle. Use this needle in the right place, and even the Biansha vultures will fall. You better speak up for your man. Shen Zichuan had been inspired by Xiao Jiming's combat style. Even if he were to establish camps along the Chashi River as a first line of defense, he would still lack a military force that could act as a heavy hammer the way the Libe armored cavalry did. As there was no way to replicate the Libe armored cavalry, Shen Zichuan had swapped the hammer for a needle. In theory, a sufficiently fortified defensive wall could be built stretching from Duanzhou to Duanzhou. If Shen Zichuan shifted Zhongbo's infantry behind this wall and turned them into bowmen equipped with heavy defensive weapons, then placed a patrolling troop of light cavalry with unpredictable movements along the Chashi River, he would possess a panoramic view of everything inside and outside the wall. This cavalry, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to call them an assassination squad, evolved from the embroidered uniform guard, could swiftly travel under cover and remain Shen Zichuan's eyes and ears on the ground. For as long as Shen Zichuan desired, he would be able to hear everything, anywhere. Zuo Tianqiu sucked in a breath of cold air. Having been stationed at Tianfei Watchtower for so many years, he understood best how deadly such a squad of assassins could be. The thought was enough to unnerve anyone. Silence descended upon the tent. Everyone was waiting for Xiao Fengshu to speak. At length, he said to Shen Zichuan, "You may trade grain for the horses you want, but if you succeed in establishing this light cavalry, see that they never take a single step into Libe." He pushed his plate away, leaned his elbow on the table, and smiled at Shen Zichuan. "Or I'll kill them, and kill you." Whew. His aura seemed to expand and bear down on Shen Zichuan, crushing him under an almost tangible weight. Before Xiao Zhiye could open his mouth to speak, Shen Zichuan pressed down on his arm. He stood his ground against the king wolf's gaze and, in that endless moment, slowly replied, "Deal." Xiao Fengshu bent a finger and flicked the rim of his bowl, retracting his imposing aura as easily as he had let it fall. After everyone had dispersed, Xiao Fengshu sat by the fire and held his dagger over the flame. "If you regret it," Zuo Tianqiu said, sitting beside him, "it's not too late to take it back." Light from the fire illuminated the planes of Xiao Fengshu's face. "This boy is too dangerous. You do know who his teacher was, don't you?" Zuo Tianqiu soothed him. "Besides, he's Zigong's disciple. He's not bad at heart. Don't brush me off with that. Even brothers born to the same parents will differ from each other. Qi Huilian wasn't that decent of a man either." Xiao Fengshu withdrew the dagger from the fire and caressed the blade with his thumb. "Cracks abound everywhere in this world, opportunities for cunning men to get a foothold. Men like him can't fight battles, yet they'll emerge to stand atop a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood." After a long period of silence, Zuo Tianqiu asked, "Then why are you willing to make a deal with him?" Xiao Fengshu looked at the sliding glint on the steel as the firelight bathed it in red. Amid the soft crackle of the bonfire, he examined his own reflection in the blade. Eventually, he said, "My son has made himself into a lock." Shen Zichuan unfastened the clasps on his robe as he faced the candle flame, bone-weary. He hadn't experienced such a feeling in a very long time. It was the frustration of being called on a bluff. Never had Shen Zichuan told anyone about his plan for Duanzhou's light cavalry, not even Qi Huilian or Xiao Zhiye. Many of his actions in the past had been rooted in impure motives. As long as he got his hands on something, he would exploit it every way he could. He called these his hypocrisies, and they had been even more atrocious before Xiao Zhiye had come into the picture. That was why he could not, dared not, tell a soul. Shen Zichuan loosened his collar, as if that would allow him to breathe. Footsteps sounded outside the tent. Xiao Chuye was speaking to the guards. At the sound of his voice, Shen Zichuan stopped what he was doing. Xiao Chuye lifted the flap and entered. Yeah. Shen Zichuan didn't turn, merely angling his head slightly as he called back to him. Xiao Chuye pressed against him from behind. Shen Zichuan melted under Xiao Chuye's touch, his earlier dread evaporating. As their noses brushed, the temperature between them rose, so warm they were soon sweating. Shen Zichuan's breath was hot, as if Xiao Chuye's kisses scalded him. His expression resembled pain, but the corners of his eyes brimmed with pleasure as he surrendered and lost himself. He was so fond of Xiao Chuye's kisses. Xiao Chuye took hold of both of Shen Zichuan's hands and brought them behind his back to bind him. He extinguished the candle, and amid the spiraling wisps of white smoke, kissed along the nape of that neck where he buried his own despondency. Lanzhou. Xiao Chuye savored the sound in his mouth. Without warning, the table was swept clean. Bent over it, Shen Zichuan wanted to reach for its edges to steady himself, but his hands were gripped so tightly he couldn't move. Shen Zichuan tilted his head until he could see the side of Xiao Chuye's face. "Kiss me," Shen Zichuan mouthed silently. But Xiao Chuye did not. He remained where he was, mere inches away, and did not move. Chapter 164. Sunrise. There was only a little distance between them. Xiao Chuye's hawkish gaze slid from Shen Zichuan's brow to his lips as he said in a hoarse voice, "Oh, how I love you." Shen Zichuan felt a shiver rise through him. It was the tremble of defeat. In the silence, he was like a captured knight. Even as it spread, it was still tangled around Xiao Chuye. The grip on his wrists was too tight, a hold so punishing that all that lay in his eyes was bare to Xiao Chuye. Xiao Chuye inched closer in the confrontation that held the promise of a kiss. He murmured, "Wicked. I love you." Shen Zichuan felt he was about to be driven mad by Xiao Chuye's words. This line undid him time and time again. He couldn't maintain the flimsiest veil of pretense. All that remained of Shen Zichuan was flayed open before Xiao Chuye. This was a side of himself Shen Zichuan could not bring himself to face. Yet everything to do with hypocrisy, deceit, and hostility was swept away in that tidal wave of desire. He was panting. To love was to hold nothing back. Shen Zichuan's eyes brimmed with tears as Xiao Chuye crowded him against the table. The sensation of being filled surged through his body as he was pushed against the table's edge. He cried out softly as his body clung to Xiao Chuye's warmth without reservation. Xiao Chuye kept both Shen Zichuan's wrists restrained, eyes fixed on where the curve of his waist led up to a spine like a crescent moon. Taking full advantage of his height, he drove up into Shen Zichuan's lustrous smoothness, thrusting with merciless force. It was as though he wanted to imprint the words, "I love you," into Shen Zichuan's body, branding them into his bones. The jade earring had been polished until it gleamed with a watery shine. Just outside the tent, the boots of the patrol squad crunched against the dirt as they made their rounds. Someone was chatting a short distance away, and the wind was sighing as it roamed the camp. But all that belonged to another world. None of it belonged to Shen Zichuan. All he could hear was the groan of the table, bumped out of place beneath him, his own cry of climax around him, and Xiao Chuye's heartbeat above him. Every single stroke echoed, "I love you. I love you." It was too much to bear. Shen Zichuan was unraveling, his voice and body freed from his control. He trembled, unable to stand firm on his feet, and as moans spilled from his lips, he shifted his restrained hands to extend a single finger, hooking it on the corner of Xiao Chuye's robe. This tiny motion dissolved Xiao Chuye's heart into a puddle. He dropped a kiss on Shen Zichuan's nape, as though holding him in his mouth. Every one of his motions was fierce, yet there was a startling gentleness in them. Shantachuan pressed back against Xiao Chuye, his waist stretched taut as a bowstring, while below, they were intimately joined. Xiao Chuye released his wrists. Shantachuan groped for the edge of the table, but he seemed to have already given up, his strength exhausted amid the rocking jolts. Instead, he reached back to hold onto Xiao Chuye's arm. A muffled sound escaped Xiao Chuye's throat as he leaned down to kiss Shantachuan's ear. He seemed to be taunting Shantachuan, and at the same time showering him with praise. A few shining drops escaped the corners of Shantachuan's eyes. He closed them, his lashes damp with tears, and with all the self-control he could muster, he called out in a soft and trembling voice, "Haye." Xiao Chuye buried his face in the side of Shantachuan's neck. He was overwhelmed, intoxicated, having been teased all day by this evil man who called his name as he pleased, every word an invitation. He took his time, as if he had just woken from sleep and was slow to think, finally, responding lightly, "Zan." Shantachuan turned his face toward Xiao Chuye, their breaths intertwining. In a show of near innocence, he called out, like a student only just learning to recite a poem, "Oh, how I love you." Xiao Chuye lost his hold on Shantachuan's hips. His hands trembled, and his throat was parched. He only pulled out with difficulty. He scooped his lanzhou off the ground and strode the few steps to the edge of the cot, where he laid him on his back. He grabbed Shantachuan's hands to pull him closer, kissing him deeply before driving in again. They had to be face to face to let their eyes take in all the best and worst of each other's expressions. Xiao Chuye pushed Shantachuan's damp hair aside. There was no space between them. Even their imperfections fit perfectly together. They tangled their limbs under the blanket of night, indulging to their heart's content, their sweat-slicked bodies clinging endlessly amid the howling winds of the battlefield. Before the break of dawn, Xiao Chuye was awake and carrying Shantachuan on his back, making their way through the frost-covered grasslands. "It's taking so long." Shantachuan gathered his fur collar around him and pressed himself closer to Xiao Chuye's back. Voice muffled, he said, "Start running." "You want to tire me out?" Xiao Chuye hitched him up on his back. Shantachuan pulled the little braid from around Xiao Chuye's collar and held it gently between his fingers. "I'm not tired." It was still very early, and the mountains to the east blocked out the edge of the horizon. The wind blew fierce, and the two of them were covered under the same cloak. They had walked out of First Sand Camp before daybreak. A small watchtower to the north had fallen into disuse, and it was there that Xiao Chuye was headed. When they arrived, they huddled under the cloak atop the old watchtower, facing east as they waited for sunrise. "I thought you'd come to propose marriage." Xiao Chuye eased Shantachuan's head onto his shoulder. "I'm getting old from all the waiting." Shantachuan was sensitive to the cold, and the wind was strong here. He uncurled one finger to lift the cloak higher and burrowed inside, wanting badly to bury all of himself into Xiao Chuye's chest and seek refuge from the wind. "I'll come back when you're 80, Shantachuan said. "By then, your father won't be able to strike me." Xiao Chuye planted his chin on top of Shantachuan's head, the cloak between them tickling his neck. "You're the prefectural governor. You ought to possess the audacity to elope." He thought a moment, then added, "The old man admires you." Did Shantachuan truly want a light cavalry of assassins merely to place them on guard duty? A squadron like this would require inhuman self-restraint. It was simply too useful. And how long would it take Shantachuan to put together such a squad? Even if he went to the great effort of establishing it and succeeded, his success would bring them back to the first question. Could this squad stay stationed along the Chashi River? Could Shantachuan truly only want to deploy them for border defense? A unit like this was a blade that would kill without restraint. There was a darkness in it that mirrored the other side of Shen Zichuan. Or would, if it wasn't for Xiao Chiye. Xiao Chiye pulled the cloak down a little to reveal the nape of Shen Zichuan's neck. Here it comes. Eyes peeking over the cloak, Shen Zichuan looked eastward. Xiao Chiye reached over and tilted his chin up. Thick clouds rolled along the horizon, the wind running rampant between the still dark sky and earth. In the next instant, golden rays broke through the gaps, countless arrows of light piercing the layers of clouds. The sun, which seemed to bear a burden of immense weight, emerged from those dark waves, turning the wisps into foam as it rose in all its majesty. The vast expanse of grassland was illuminated in a heartbeat, sunlight igniting the thin pavement of frost into a carpet of diamonds. Withered grass seemed to roar to life, the wild call of the wind clear and distinct in their ears. Xiao Zi'an, Shen Zichuan said suddenly. Xiao Chiye poked him on the cheek. Shen Zichuan grabbed his finger, revealing the red marks on his wrists. He seemed to be considering something. Golden waves of brilliance rippled across the sky. As they watched, blue spread out like ink on a sheaf of rice paper, washing the entire canvas of the sky over their heads. The snow-capped peaks of the Hongyan Mountains rose against the summit of the clouds, where falcons screamed as they circled. Cast in dawn's golden hue, Shen Zichuan and Xiao Chiye turned their faces to the wind. The next gust was so strong, Shen Zichuan had the illusion he was about to be blown away. But Xiao Chiye was a rock bracing him at his back as he gradually moved to take Shen Zichuan's hands. You can do whatever you want, Xiao Chiye whispered into his ear. As long as I'm here, you'll never fall. Chapter 165 Frostfall. Xiao Chiye gifted the horse Liu'er had set aside to Shen Zichuan. While he still had some time to spare, he accompanied Shen Zichuan riding on the grasslands of the war zone. This horse was snow white from nose to tail, with only a small shield of black on its chest. It was beautiful and intelligent, and even more lively than Snowcrest. There were no battles to be fought today. Xiao Fangshu sat on the railing in his armor and watched Shen Zichuan canter around the paddock. He said to Zuo Qianqiu beside him, This habit. Zuo Qianqiu squinted against the sunlight, deciphering a written prescription in his hand. Finish your sentence, man. Reminds me of Aya's mother. Xiao Fangshu raised a finger and traced Shen Zichuan's trajectory twice. Can't ride straight. He lived in Chudu all this time. He hasn't had the practice. Just let Aya take him out riding a little more often. Zuo Qianqiu lifted his head. Have you found Yidong? The venerable master's elusive. His whereabouts are unpredictable. He's not easy to track down. Xiao Fangshu brushed the dust off the helmet in his hand. Why? We need to get Yidong to take a look at the kid, Zuo Qianqiu said gravely. I saw him in Chudu last year. He appeared frail then, but there was no major internal damage. Looking at him now, he's in much worse shape. Xiao Fangshu sized up Shen Zichuan for a moment. That serious? You pay the price twofold for consuming that medicine for as long as he did, Zuo Qianqiu said. He suffered 3 major tribulations, one after the other in Chudu, and what happened to Qi Huilian was a heavy blow to him. The good thing is Aya and Ji Gang are both paying attention. Xiao Fangshu turned his gaze to Zuo Qianqiu. Can he be healed? Frowning slightly, Zuo Qianqiu folded the prescription and tucked it in his lapels. Tough to say. Let's get a little strength back in him first. An extra bowl of fresh milk appeared on Shen Zichuan's table at lunch. Having no knowledge of the distribution of supplies on the front lines, he merely assumed it was provided on Xiao Chiye's instruction. But later, when Xiao Chiye entered, he brought with him another bowl of milk. After he drank it, Shen Zichuan's stomach was full. Xiao Chiye didn't comment, believing the additional milk was from Zuo Qianqiu. On his way to thank his shifu, he bumped into Chun Yang coming in to collect the bowl. Is it Shifu's? Xiao Chuye nimbly pulled on his outer robe. I'll take it back to him. Chun Yang set the bowl on the tray and lowered his voice. It's the princess. Xiao Chuye's hand slowed. This morning, his lordship told Wu Ziyu to give his own portion to Gongzi. He even instructed border camp to send milk-producing cows and sheep to Suzhou. Chun Yang picked up the tray. He made a special point of telling us not to talk about it or tell Gongzi. This old man. Xiao Chuye nodded. Give mine to my father tomorrow morning to make up for it. After a moment's hesitation, he called out to Chun Yang again just as he was ducking under the tent flap. Wait. Never mind. I understand. Shan Zichuan couldn't stay in the war zone for long. The weather in the Hongyan Mountains was changeable, and he had to return after only 2 days. On the day of his departure, a heavy fog descended, and the damp wind in the eastern mountain range blew so hard it sent the military banners snapping. Xiao Chuye secured Shan Zichuan's coat and wrapped the fur collar around his neck. Seeing Xiao Chuye had no overcoat, Shan Zichuan asked quietly, It's about to be winter here. Has the cavalry not been provided with winter attire? My sister-in-law is working on it. Xiao Chuye propped himself against the carriage door to shield Shan Zichuan from the wind. You should bring Jigang Shifu to the homeland for New Year's. Shan Zichuan cast a glance over Xiao Chuye's shoulder and leaned in to whisper. Can I? Xiao Chuye whispered back. Hurry up and marry me to make things clear to my father. Otherwise, we'll look like we're having a secret affair. Shan Zichuan had no idea Xiao Chuye had already laid his cards on the table. On hearing this, he nodded solemnly. Your sister-in-law gave me a set of bracelets last time. I'll be sure to bring a gift in return in the new year. Finding him adorable, Xiao Chuye laughed and stroked his cheek. The armored cavalry will escort you back. Write me when you reach Suzhou. I'll return to border camp in another 3 or 4 days. It's closer. I'll write you a stack. Shan Zichuan slowed his speech, as if that would slow down time. I haven't made a new fan for you yet. I was so busy I forgot. Xiao Chuye brushed the jade earring with a fingertip. I'll craft you a new one for the new year. I'm off, then, Shan Zichuan said. Xiao Chuye ducked his head, leaning toward the carriage window, but before he could move in, Shan Zichuan cupped his cheeks and kissed him first. This kiss was brief, a touch lasting a fleeting instant. Xiao Chuye straightened up, lowering the curtain and taking a few steps back. Fei Sheng stood off to the side, contemplating how to best ingratiate himself with Xiao Chuye. But before he could say a word, Xiao Chuye grabbed his neck and hauled him close. Wherever Lanzhou is, Xiao Chuye fixed him with a cold, detached gaze. You'd better be too. The grip around Fei Sheng's neck was like an iron vice. He nodded breathlessly, and Xiao Chuye released him. The wheels of the carriage began to turn. Xiao Chuye stood in place and watched it go. Inside, Shan Zichuan tugged the curtain open. The jagged peaks of the Hongyan Mountains behind Xiao Chuye were partially veiled by clouds, and the wind howled. In that moment, his silhouette seemed to overlap with that of the misty mountains. Shan Zichuan gazed back at him. Several dark shapes suddenly swooped down out of the wind. Flying at the head of the cast of falcons, Meng let loose a cry that reverberated through the camp. Tents of all sizes lifted their entrance flaps, while a long whistle sounded from the top of the watchtower. When Xiao Fengshu stepped out of his tent, his battle steed was already saddled. He grasped the hilt of his blade for a moment before swinging atop his horse. He boomed. Squad 3, guard the camp. Vanguards move first. Supply squad, pack up and retreat down to 2nd Sand Camp to protect the craftsmen. Xiao Chuye stepped back and put on his helmet, then turned to mount Snowcrest, who had just trotted over. Shan Zichuan could barely keep his eyes open in the piercing gale. He clung to the carriage door, squinting through the gusts of wind as Xiao Chuye receded further and further into the distance. The clouds dispersed, scattering into millions of snowflakes that danced in the skies of Liu'er. The first snow of winter had come to the battlefield. It was pre-dawn hours when Li Jianting opened her eyes. She sat up, and the palace maid in attendance stepped forward to pull back the heavy drapes. Feng Quan, dressed in the official robes of a palace eunuch, nimbly knelt down to help the heir apparent put on her shoes. After Muzhu had assassinated Li Jianheng, Feng Quan had found a scapegoat to die in his place. He had then hidden away in the Xue manor all this while, where he had become Li Jianting's personal eunuch. When Li Jianting came to live in the palace, Feng Quan returned with her. Xue Xiuzhuo had not initially intended to use him again, but upon Li Jianting's insistence, he allowed Feng Quan to change his name and remained by Li Jianting's side. "Sir, how did you escape the well?" Li Jianting slept poorly, unaccustomed to the massive imperial bedchamber. All the palace maids serving the heir apparent knew Li Jianting permitted only Feng Quan to serve in the hall at night. As they waited in the outer chamber, they occasionally heard the sound of her cries, trapped in the throes of a nightmare. Everyone in the bedchamber stepped softly as they helped Li Jianting dress in silence. When she was appropriately attired, Feng Quan bowed and stepped forward, lifting his sleeve to affix the flower embellishment on her brow. Pastels and whites did not suit the heir apparent. She was best adorned in scarlet reds. By sunrise, Li Jianting was waiting under the eaves for the various officials participating in the classics colloquium to arrive for their lectures. It was windy today, and Feng Quan covered her with a cloak before standing to one side to shield her from the wind. The cold slowly turned his lips purple. Li Jianting glanced at Feng Quan. "It's already autumn. Didn't the caps and kerchief service issue new coats?" Feng Quan was not permitted to look at Li Jianting directly. He turned slightly to her and answered, "They did, Your Highness." She raised her finger to touch her own cloak, but she understood her every move was being watched. It would be inappropriate indeed for her to undress for a eunuch and make fertile ground for gossip. She raised her eyes toward the upturned eaves shrouded in gloom. In the end, she didn't say a word more. Perhaps there'd been some great delay on the way here because the officials were notably late to arrive today. Li Jianting stood until her legs went numb. She looked toward Feng Quan again. This time, she saw his ear peeking out in the dimness. Feng Quan thought Li Jianting was restless because she was cold. "This subject shall send someone over to take a look. Your ear is pierced." Li Jianting gazed fixedly at his earlobe. Feng Quan's eyes shot toward Li Jianting. His fingers twitched. He instinctively wanted to cover his ear, but instead he lowered his gaze and nodded. Cautiously, he slowed his breathing. He found this tiny hole in his ear a nightmare, one that made him gag and amplified his panic every moment under Li Jianting's silence. At length, Li Jianting spotted a eunuch leading the officials toward the eaves. She inclined her head respectfully and waited for them. Head bowed, she said softly, "It looks nice." As he stepped forward to hold the curtain for the officials, Feng Quan threw a swift glance at Li Jianting, but she didn't look at him. It was as if she hadn't spoken at all as she raised herself from her bow and followed her teachers inside. The fists Feng Quan had hidden under his sleeves were clammy with sweat. He retreated to one side of the door, and only after a long time did he take a stealthy peek inside. Through the gaps in the door curtain, he saw the rippling hem of Li Jianting's skirt, and felt bewildered by her words. Shanzituan's return journey was a slow one. The roads were difficult to traverse in rain and snow, and Fei Sheng took utmost care for fear Shanzituan would fall ill along the way. He attended to everything personally. Even with the Liu'er armored cavalry escorting them, the embroidered uniformed guard still rode close beside the carriage, and Fei Sheng supervised the daily brewing of Shanzituan's medicine himself. The carriage came to a stop shortly after passing border camp. Mudslides had damaged the roads ahead, and repairs would delay the journey by a day. The troops would have to spend the night under the open sky. Shan Zichuan stepped out of the carriage and brought Ding Tao along to walk his new horse nearby. "Has Gongzi thought of a name yet?" Ding Tao asked, walking backward and lacing his fingers behind his head. "Frostfall." Snowcrest. Frostfall. Shan Zichuan stroked the horse's mane as he led it along. Understanding at once, Ding Tao clenched his fist. "What a great name! It goes perfectly with Master Snowcrest." Shan Zichuan looked southward. Ding Tao turned to do the same and commented, "Duanzhou is 8 or 9 days' ride that way." So close. Shan Zichuan hadn't realized. "I don't see any Libe relay stations around here." "There used to be some, but they were abandoned. Everyone has gone northeast to fight Biansha." Shan Zichuan's breath came out as a white cloud in the cold air. He turned his gaze away and strolled a while longer with Ding Tao. After dark, Fei Sheng led the men on overnight duty. He sat alongside the men from the Libe armored cavalry and warmed himself by the campfire, hunching his shoulders against the cold. "It's seriously freezing up here. Libe's not even entered winter, yet there's already snow in the war zone. It can't be easy on my brothers here. Have some more meat." One of the accompanying soldiers was a brigade commander. He didn't stand on ceremony with Fei Sheng and sat around the fire with the rest of them, helping himself to the meat. "Snow in Libe always comes early. Usually, we'd be going home around this time, leaving just a few battalions to guard the frontier. I don't think the war will stop this year." Fei Sheng accepted the flask of on horseback and took a few mouthfuls. The burn made him exclaim with satisfaction. "If it wasn't for you all holding the fort here, all the prefectures down south would suffer." "It can't be helped." The brigade commander's face was ruddy with wine and food. "We're the Libe armored cavalry." "Everyone says the Libe armored cavalry is the iron bastion of the north. All of you are true steel-boned warriors," Fei Sheng said with feeling. "I always admired the armored cavalry, even back in Chudu. Han Cheng, that old dog, was jealous when he saw Libe had the emperor's favor. He never stopped spouting bullshit. I couldn't stand to listen. I told him off multiple times. Well, now here I am in Libe. And it turns out I was right. All my brothers here are real men worthy of befriending. If any of you come to Suzhou on missions in the future, don't worry about a thing. The minute you get off your horse, go right to the prefectural yamen and give them my name. I'll make sure everyone here's taken care of." Thrilled, the brigade commander patted Fei Sheng on the shoulder. A worthy friend indeed." Everyone had a merry time chatting and feasting, warmed by the fire that burned all night to ward off wolves that might be lured in by the aroma of cooking meat. The Libe armored cavalry sent a patrol squad to make a few rounds in the vicinity. When they returned, one of them leaned over and said in a few words in the brigade commander's ear. The brigade commander wiped his mouth. No trace left of his jovial expression. "Armor on!" Fei Sheng was on his feet in an instant. The embroidered uniform guard behind him were wide awake as well. Shan Zichuan had yet to retire. He sat in the carriage, reading the latest letters from Suzhou by candlelight. Hearing footsteps, he asked without raising his head, "Is there someone nearby?" Hand on the hilt of his blade, Fei Sheng stood at the window and spoke quickly. "Libe's night patrol found traces of carriage tracks south of us. Master, we're close to border camp. When the camp was attacked back in the 6th month, the catapults came from the south." Although Fei Sheng was always talking, his observation skills were unimpeachable, and his intelligence gathering was first-rate. While he didn't possess Ding Tao's eidetic memory, he retained every detail of documents he laid eyes on. He wouldn't let any clue slip by him. "Let the armored cavalry lead the way." Shan Zichuan donned his cloak and disembarked. "Whoever it is, send someone to tell them. Don't alert them of our presence." Fei Sheng grunted affirmation. Shan Zichuan looked up at the starry canopy overhead, then turned toward the south. "The border of Duanzhou is just south of here. If we run into a Biansha supply squad, it's very likely they took a detour north from Duanzhou." Fei Sheng crouched and studied the mud at his feet for a moment, then stood back up. It snowed just a few days back. The roads here have fallen into disrepair. It's not a smooth ride. If they're transporting supplies, they'll be heavy, enough to slow them down. They'll likely have arranged for a large number of armed escorts. Follow them. Shen Zichuan thought for a moment. The carriage can take up the rear. We'll take the opportunity to visit Duanzhou. The Prince of Jianxing's manor was in Duanzhou, Shen Wei's former seat. Not daring to make wild guesses, Fei Sheng turned to give orders to the men, then extinguished the campfire, wiping out all traces of their presence before following the armored cavalry under the cover of the night. Chapter 166. Liu'er. Early the next morning, Shen Zichuan stared at the mess of footprints on the path and asked Fei Sheng, "Was it a grain wagon?" The wheel tracks were distinct in the mud, a clear sign that whatever passed had been carrying a heavy load. "Whatever they're carrying is heavier than grain." Fei Sheng dropped to one knee and scrutinized the tracks. "I'd guess heavy weaponry. Master, they went to the trouble of sneaking into Libe from the south. Could they be planning another raid?" Third Sand Camp is now well-equipped and well-trained, with Guo Wei Li as their commander. And Border Camp isn't far off. With a large number of troops backing them up, a raid won't do them much good. Shen Zichuan turned toward the south. Besides, if they came from Duanzhou, it's possible they're thinking of transporting supplies to the border along the Chashi River. But what supplies were there in Duanzhou? Duanzhou's granaries had long been scraped clean by the bandits. What was more, there was no garrison troops in Duanzhou to stop a small troop of Biansha horsemen, if that's what this was. So why bother with an unnecessary detour north? Shen Zichuan thought carefully, sifting through everything he remembered about Duanzhou. He recalled the Biansha horsemen had used catapults when they raided Border Camp in the 6th month. Taking a few steps along the wheel tracks, he said, "Military supplies, provisions, armaments." He turned back to Fei Sheng. After the fall of Zhongbo, the Ministry of War didn't reclaim the armories of the 6 prefectures, intending to leave the equipment for the re-established garrison troops. But Chudu was negligent in their supervision, and eventually, these armories and their contents were forgotten. Fei Sheng stood, not bothering to brush at the mud on his knee. There should have been plenty of siege engines among that equipment. If they fall into the hands of the Biansha horsemen, Duanzhou will be in imminent danger. "Don't let them out of your sight," Shen Zichuan said. The horses strained against their traces, trying to pull the wheels free of the mud. Liu'er, wrapped up in a coat and wearing a brimmed biangu hat, was attempting to curl up against the cold to sleep. He didn't succeed. The Biansha man with him, disguised as a traveling merchant, yanked him off the wagon by the ankle and whipped him awake. "Get up! Push!" Liu'er yelped and scrambled to his feet, then limped over to push the wagon. He was getting on in age, and his hands shook. Someone stumped on his foot, and the pain nearly made him keel over. He was one of many bandits escorting this wagon. All their blades had been seized by the Biansha, and they now toiled under the cracks of horsewhips. Following their defeat in Suzhou, the bandits of Mount Luo had returned home crestfallen. Rumors that Lei Jingzhe was a spy for the imperial army had spread like wildfire, and Mount Luo had fractured into over a dozen small strongholds that fought tooth and nail for control. Liu'er, Ding Niu, and the others had each formed their own bands, hoping to reclaim Lei Chongming's glory and become the next chief of Mount Luo. But unexpectedly, another group of bandits, assisted by the Biansha horsemen, had overwhelmed them in Duanzhou. Their main forces were slaughtered, and those that remained were captured as the Biansha horsemen's prisoners. Ding Niu had refused to transport grain for the Biansha horsemen and was killed at the end of the 7th month. Liu'er, who cherished his life, didn't dare resist after that. He was now part of the Biansha troops' specialized escort for grain transport. Liu'er hunched over like a monkey, his long, drooping eyebrows quivering as he strained and pushed. He heaved with his fellows, not daring to slack off under his captor's eyes. Even so, he didn't escape a lashing. Liu'er grimaced in pain and huddled into himself, trying to hide behind others. The wheels were lodged in the mud, and harsh panting filled the chilly night. These bandits, used to riding roughshod over others, couldn't hold up under the repeated lashings. Many were whipped until their skin was flayed open and their flesh tore. The wagon didn't stop until hours before dawn. A few clusters of cavalrymen roamed the vicinity, hollering at the bandits to assemble and stand properly. Liu'er's coat had been shredded to ribbons by the whips, wads of cotton spilling out. He wrapped his arms around himself and waded through the marsh, which had a thin layer of ice on it. His robe was tattered, and his ragged trousers fluttered open to reveal a pair of legs like hemp stalks. The old man shivered in the cold. The Biansha horsemen sat down to eat, while the bandits were herded to stand to one side to shield them from the wind. Liu'er curled his arms up within his sleeves. He was so hungry he was seeing stars. He licked his lips and squatted to take a rest. "When will these shitty days come to an end?" one of his former subordinates muttered as he untied the cloth sack on his back and secured it around his waist. "God damn it. They're gonna whip me to death. These motherfuckers really don't hold back, beating us like livestock." He shifted on his feet. Liu'er was so hungry he could taste bile in his throat, yet he was still thinking of having a smoke. He fumbled in his sleeves for a long time before fishing out some tobacco dust, which he brought to his nose and sniffed hard. "They're not educated. That's why they treat people like cattle, no? Those tattoos on their bodies are all raptors and beasts. Hell, they even drink raw blood. Ew." "What?" The other man spat. "Had I known we'd end up this way, I would have given this up and joined the Imperial Army back in Zhou. Damn it! At least it wouldn't have benefited the Biansha. Horse shit." Liu'er stuffed the tobacco dust back up his sleeve and shot a furtive glance at the Biansha men through his fellow captive's legs. "We're bandits. What good could come of defecting to the Imperial Army? We'd still be traitors to somebody. They're going to use these siege engines we're dragging over to fight Li Bei and Zhongbo. Who knows? When all's said and done, maybe even the Emperor and Chudu will be taken prisoner, and we'll have to kneel to the Biansha king." Before Liu'er could say any more, his former subordinate yanked him up. Legs trembling, Liu'er stuck close to the group and stood ramrod straight, not even daring to move his eyes. The Biansha man leading the group was called Jida. His head was clean-shaven, and his exposed muscular bicep was tattooed with a scorpion. He wiped his mouth as he passed them, and the look in his eyes made Liu'er's legs tremble harder. He was ready to piss himself from fright. But Jida didn't give them any trouble tonight, merely leading his men to the front where the supply wagon carrying the ballista was parked. The Biansha were all keenly interested in these massive siege weapons. The bandits remained resting where they were. All their dry rations had become soaked and musty. Liu'er still ate it all with his tobacco-stained teeth. The handful of them huddled together to keep warm. Fortunately, it didn't rain, or there would be more than a few freezing to death tonight. They sat on the ground, afraid to sleep. But Liu'er was old. Gradually, it became harder for him to stay awake, and he dozed off, leaning against the wagon wheel. "Shouldn't they have brought more troops?" Feixiang squatted down once again and examined the footprints. "Most of these tracks belong to the bandits pushing the wagons. There aren't that many Biansha horsemen." With his helmet on, the brigade commander sitting atop his horse looked like a cast-iron statue. His voice came out deep and muffled as he pulled his horse's reins. "They don't want to draw any attention. They probably have agents planted in Mount Luo. Otherwise, they wouldn't dare penetrate this far into Great Zhou with so many people." He turned to Shanzituan. "Governor, if you want to find out who they're working with, we have to capture and interrogate them before they enter Mount Luo's territory." Their escort from the Li Bei armored cavalry wasn't large, but every man was a battlefield elite who'd fought the Hanma tribe alongside Xiao Fangshu. With the embroidered uniformed guards' assistance in battle and the dark, frosty night was cover. Intercepting the Biansha party should pose no problem. Shen Zichuan peered into the night. Ding Tao, you stay here. Fei Sheng, go with the Libe armored cavalry. Liu'er was awoken by the bitter cold. He rubbed both feet, feeling he might really freeze to death. He looked up at the Biansha horsemen crowding around the ballista a little distance away. One man's strength was not sufficient to draw this crossbow. Usually, it would be situated at the rear of a battle formation or placed on the walls to defend cities. It was a formidable weapon in combat and a familiar sight in Li Bei's camps. The Biansha horsemen had taken quite a few beatings at its hands. Moving silently, Liu'er felt his way along the ground with his hands and used the wagon as a cover to make his way to its back. Then he crawled beneath it, ducking as low as possible to hide from view. When he made it to the rear of the procession, he dug his shoes into the mud and sprang forward, a sorry sight as he broke into a run. Jida was wiping an arrow when he caught a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. He shouted in Biansha tongue, "We've got a runner!" The Biansha horsemen mounted their horses in seconds, brandishing their whips as they bellowed and chased after him. How on earth could Liu'er have expected Jida to be so sharp-eyed? To think he still saw him from that distance and on such a dark night. Liu'er considered stopping and attempting to say he was merely taking a piss, but when he looked back and saw those scimitars out of their scabbards, he knew he would die if he didn't make good this escape. Liu'er tightened his waist sash and kicked off his shoes in the mud. He fell, then climbed back to his feet. His vision was filled with the image of how Ding Niu had looked when he died. The bandits had been able to call themselves kings on Mount Luo because of the Biansha horsemen, and now it was because of the Biansha horsemen that they had become prisoners. Liu'er muttered unintelligibly, pleading with all the deities and Buddhas he knew. The sores that had formed on the old man's soles made him grimace in pain. He was terrified of death, so afraid he wanted to drop to the ground right there and beg for mercy. But the shouts and curses of the Biansha horsemen made it clear they weren't looking to recapture Liu'er. They had no lack of hands. What they lacked were poor fools they could make examples of. Liu'er shuddered as he fell into a mud hole. The Biansha horsemen surrounded him, and Liu'er burst into tears. He raised both hands in surrender and felt his bladder empty itself into the cold, muddy water. Warm urine soaked the legs of his trousers. Unable to understand the Biansha tongue, Liu'er merely kowtowed to the cavalry in terror. "I'm sorry," he wailed hysterically. "Don't kill me." The Biansha horsemen coughed, then spat thick globs of phlegm onto Liu'er's face. They smashed their scabbards down on Liu'er's back, sending him sprawling flat in the mud hole. Mouthful of filthy water, scimitars lifted his long, drooping brows, and he swallowed the water in fear, laughter and sobs spilling hysterically from him as snot and tears soiled his face. Jida stood in place and watched the cavalry amuse themselves with Liu'er. He kicked away the fabric cover of the ballista, then shouted for his men to drag Liu'er out so they could test the huge crossbow using the old man as a target. The sound of wheels turning scared Liu'er out of his wits. His legs dragged against the ground as they hauled him away. He slapped himself on the cheeks with both hands, cursing. "Why the hell did I run?" Liu'er slapped himself until his cheeks were red and sodden. His captors hoisted him up and hung him from a tree branch a distance away. Bent over at the waist, Liu'er took in huge gasps of air as he watched the cavalry load the ballista with a bolt as thick as a child's arm. Its arrowhead was unusual, with a rounded end forged from iron. When such a bolt descended from the sky, the impact would send brain matter splattering over the ground. The gears clicked as they turned. Once Jida pulled the trigger, Liu'er would watch that arrow soar up into the sky before hurtling down to impale him. His mouth moved soundlessly. Then, with an unexpected burst of courage, he bared his yellow teeth and cursed. Fuck your ancestors! Fuck all of your ancestors! Tears streamed down Liu'er's face. He choked on his sobs, as if he might breathe his last at any second. He'd always been a bandit, but he hadn't been rootless. He'd had a son and daughters back at home, and his wonderful wife had been his childhood sweetheart who had followed him out of the village. Only when both husband and wife were past their prime had they been blessed with 3 children. Of them, 2 were daughters who'd had matches made for them in the 3rd year of Xiande. They were to be married in spring that year. His son had wanted to be a soldier. Liu'er had spent ages buttering up Lei Chongming before he finally managed to get his son entry into the Duanzhou garrison troops. In the end, the entire garrison had perished in the Chashi sinkhole that year, just before the Biansha horsemen razed the city. Chapter 167. Guest. The sky was dark, devoid of stars. Liu'er huffed white puffs of steam. He could no longer tell if he was dead or alive. He hung like a piece of cotton, wadding in the wind, light as a feather. Jida struggled to trigger the enormous crossbow. He shoved away the subordinates beside him to check on the weapon himself, barking a stream of questions in the Biansha tongue. But his subordinates were unfamiliar with such heavy weaponry. They called for a few bandits to examine the device. Jida unscrewed his water skin to take a drink as he stood bare-chested in the chill night air and waited. Fearing he would be subjected to the same treatment as Liu'er, his former subordinate lay prone on the ground, not daring to move a muscle. He stared at the muddy water in front of his face and noticed subtle tremors coursing through it. Thinking it was caused by his own rapid breathing, he raised both hands to cover his mouth and nose. But the tremors didn't stop. If anything, they became even more pronounced. Jida was the first to sense something amiss. He lowered the water skin and listened intently. Then he threw the skin onto the ground and shouted, "The armored cavalry's here!" But it was too late. Under the cover of darkness, the Libe armored cavalry had been creeping forward for half the night. Now, like a tiger, they pounced. The wagon beside Jida overturned with a loud crash. The startled horses whinnied as the wagon, weighing hundreds of caddies, dragged them to the ground. The mounted crossbows sent up a wave of mud, and the wagons beside Liu'er's former subordinate shifted along the slippery ground. The heavy supply wagons collided haphazardly, and chaos erupted as both men and horses were thrown off their feet. Jida backed away from the mess, still calm as he shouted, "Mount your horses!" The Libe armored cavalry's battle steeds wore full body armor, and the sound of their hooves as they drew nearer was like thunder to the ear. Encased in iron, the armored cavalry had no fear of the scimitars. They were like a dark wall that smashed through the formation of the Biansha supply squad. In iron armor furnished with long, thick spikes at the chest, their battle steeds were unstoppable in a head-on charge. The Biansha horsemen couldn't outrun them. They were knocked to the ground and trampled to a bloody pulp before they could get back up. The brigade commander gestured to Fei Sheng beside him. Fei Sheng, lightly armored on his own horse, circled into position and brought his saber level with the brigade commanders. In one coordinated move, they charged Jida, flanking him in a pincer attack. Jida mounted his horse, eyes fixed on the brigade commander, as if he hadn't registered Fei Sheng's approach at all. He leaned forward, and the pony beneath him broke into a gallop, running like the wind toward the brigade commander. The horses crossed paths in the blink of an eye. The brigade commander swung his longsword, intending to hack off Jida's head. But his swing missed the mark. Jida seemed to have disappeared into thin air. In the next instant, a hammer slammed into the back of the brigade commander's head. His eyes and nose began to bleed immediately from the impact, and his ears rang. That nearly airtight iron armor could weather any blows from sharp weapons, but it had a fatal weakness. It could not withstand this kind of blunt impact. The brigade commander dropped off the back of the horse and tumbled headlong to the ground. A sharp, shooting pain drilled through his skull. The buzz in his ears was deafening. He tried to crawl to his feet, but his body was trembling too violently. Blood trickled through the gap in his helmet. He couldn't hear his own voice, but he continued to move his lips. Take off your helm. The iron hammer smashed into the back of the brigade commander's head once again. Blow after blow rained down, crushing his helmet until it was a lump of deformed metal. Blood spilled over the ground. The brigade commander went silent. Jida squatted on the corpse's back and wiped the brigade commander's blood from his scorpion tattoo, then stuck his fingers in his mouth to lick them clean. Contained in his sinewy muscle was a shocking amount of explosive strength. He lifted his iron hammer and locked eyes with Fei Sheng. Fei Sheng felt his hair stand on end. Catching his mood, the horse under him tossed its head in fear. Fei Sheng swallowed with difficulty. Even after years of serving as an embroidered uniform guard, he quailed at the expression in the other man's eyes. This was no ordinary Biansha horseman, yet this wasn't one of the Biansha's elite forces. They were unlike Hassan's troops who carried nimble pike daggers. Instead, they were equipped with spiked iron hammers. This was a Biansha force that had never made an appearance on the Li Bei battlefields. Oh no. The thought was terrifying. A strangled gasp escaped Fei Sheng. If an iron hammer like this were to be delivered to the front lines, the armored cavalry would become lambs at the slaughter. Any advantage they derived from their armor would be instantly negated. Retreat! Fei Sheng yanked on his reins and bellowed, Retreat! They had to get out of there. Fei Sheng turned his mount and urged the horse into a desperate gallop. But even this didn't go as planned. This peculiar and treacherous squad was tailing him like a shadow. Jida had clearly fixed on him as a target, relentless in his pursuit. The two parties engaged in a cat-and-mouse chase in the dark. Fei Sheng had finally gotten a taste of the fabled Biansha horseman. The animal beneath him was a fine steed, but it couldn't widen the distance. Jida remained hot on his heels. Jida's iron hammer swung at the back of Fei Sheng's head. Fei Sheng dodged it by the skin of his teeth. His horse was galloping out of control. Fei Sheng had nowhere near the Biansha horseman's skill as a rider and nearly slipped out of the saddle amid the jolts and bumps. The two parties were already hundreds of paces away from the supply squad when Fei Sheng realized he stood no chance of shaking his pursuers. But he couldn't retreat either. Jida had already caught up with him. Fei Sheng did not wear the armor of the Li Bei armored cavalry. The iron hammer wasn't much threat to him. Jida switched back to his scimitar. That crescent moon blade locked against Fei Sheng's Xiu Chuan saber. Behind him, the squads had converged, fighting at close quarters. Blade against blade, the two men plunged headlong into the sparse forest. Withered branches lashed Fei Sheng's face. He tugged on his blade, but it was ensnared in Jida's scimitar. Jida bared his teeth in a cruel smile as he said in Great Zhou's language with perfect pronunciation, "A warm welcome to our guests." Fei Sheng was too preoccupied to retort. Jida leaned forward, yanking his scimitar back, and Fei Sheng's Xiu Chuan saber slipped from his hand and went flying. His enemy's horse rammed his from the side, knocking Fei Sheng from the saddle. He rolled to the ground and reached for the short blade at his waist, bringing it up before his face to parry the next blow. Jida's scimitar had fallen along with the Xiu Chuan saber. He tightened his grip on the hammer. Relaxing his right arm, he swung the hammer in a loose arc up into Fei Sheng's face. The blade Fei Sheng held crumpled from the impact, and his whole forearm went numb. But he still reacted swiftly, rolling to the side and casting away the ruined blade. He was unarmed as he backed away from Jida. Warily hunched over, Fei Sheng put more distance between them. He steadied his breathing, then made a condescending shooing noise at Jida, as if driving away an unwanted animal. Fully enraged by it, Jida gripped his hammer. But as he swung it up, he felt a sudden weight on his back. Strangling Jida's burly neck, Ding Tao strained to call out, "Big Bear!" Jida grabbed the youth's arm, intending to fling him over his shoulder and onto the ground. Yet before he could, a figure sprinted out from cover and shot toward him head first, slamming like a battering ram into Jida's ribs. The Biansha soldier staggered under the impact, and Ding Tao seized the opportunity to break free. Li Xiong had been riding in the carriage these past few days, having the time of his life resting and eating. Now he flung out both arms and widened them around Jida's waist, widening his stance as if he intended to lift Jida off the ground as one would pull up the trunk of a tree. Jida's hammer swung out and slammed into Li Xiong's back. Li Xiong hung on tight, but cried out in pain. "Ow! Tao Zi!" Rubbing his own numb arm, Ding Tao yelped, "Hit him with Ji-style boxing!" Li Xiong loosened his grip and bellowed as he threw a punch at Jida's chest. The force knocked Jida back 2 full steps. Happy with this result, Li Xiong followed up with several more, every blow striking flesh. He recalled everything Ji Gang had taught him. Puffing out his chest, he looked back at Ding Tao. "He can't—" Jida smashed him with a backhanded blow of the hammer, knocking him to the ground. No matter how sturdy this lad might be, the blow was more than he could withstand. Fortunately, Li Xiong had reacted swiftly and thrown up his legs to shield his head. Even so, the force of the blow knocked one of his teeth out. Tasting blood, he spat the tooth onto the ground, finally angry. "Blockhead! Get up!" Ding Tao yelled anxiously. Unable to get his feet under him in time, Li Xiong was forced to roll out of the way with all his strength. The hammer scraped his cheek and slammed into the ground. Mud splashed over Li Xiong's head, and he spat dirt from his mouth. Thinking quickly, Ding Tao leaned down and stirred the mud with his brush. He gave Li Xiong's shoulders a hard kick. "Go!" Then, with a sudden flick of the brush, he splashed muddy water into Jida's eyes. Jida hastily scrubbed it away, but Li Xiong was already moving. He pressed both hands into the mud and slid forward, attempting to slip between Jida's legs, but he was too bulky. He only made it halfway before he got stuck. Still, this boy had a one-track mind. He simply had to go this way. As he tried to brute force his way through, he knocked Jida over instead. Ding Tao wanted to cheer, but Jida, having swiped his eyes clear, grabbed Ding Tao's ankle. Ding Tao had come to grief too many times from leaving one foot in reach and had long since learned to play it smart. The instant he felt Jida's grip, he lifted both arms to protect the back of his head and closed his eyes as he went limp. The moment he hit the ground, he shouted, "It doesn't hurt. I'm fine." Li Xiong climbed to his feet in the muck and lunged for his enemy's neck. Jida, already on guard against chokeholds, rammed his elbow into the bridge of Li Xiong's nose. Instantly, Li Xiong felt a burning pain. Jida's next blow sent Li Xiong flying into the mud, blood streaming from the youth's mouth and nose. Jida rolled his shoulders, cracking his joints as if to indicate that the blows they'd exchanged were only a warm-up. The real fight started now. His arms were far burlier than Li Xiong's. As Li Xiong sprawled in the mud, hand over his nose and mouth, he caught a blurry glimpse of the poisonous scorpion inked on Jida's arm. Before Ding Tao could react, he felt himself lifted upside down by the ankle, brush and notebook slipping out of his lapels. Jida swung him up with all his might, sending the poisonous needles and secret weapons he carried tumbling out next, as well as a little oil paper packet. Ding Tao scrambled with both hands to grab it, to no avail. My candy!" "Sir." Ding Tao. Blood rushing to his head, Ding Tao saw the paper-wrapped candies fall into an open hand. A gust swept past them, and a flutter of white sleeves descended on the muddy ground like a piece of drifting snow, arriving with the wind, then swirling up into the air once again. The cold glint of avalanche was like the crystal ripple of autumn waters as it arced toward Jida's chest, almost too fast to see. Jida had nowhere to retreat. He cast Ding Tao aside, attempting to free a hand to grab hold of Avalanche's tip. But even this was too slow. It took only an instant for the blade to reach his chest. Jida failed to grab hold of it, and Avalanche flicked up with a swish of white sleeve to slash toward Jida's throat. This time, Jida twisted to dodge, taking the blade in his shoulder. A master! Alarm bells went off in Jida's head, but in the next moment, it dawned on him. Though this man had descended with the force of a thunderbolt, his first blow earlier had already exposed the hollow frailty of his constitution. Jida's mouth twisted in a sardonic smile as his hand chopped toward the side of Shantachuan's neck. As the white robe danced out of the way like a misty cloud, he closed in and balled his hands into fists to block Shantachuan's next attack before grabbing Avalanche's blade with a twist of his wrist. With Avalanche trapped, Jida's other hand shot out to catch hold of Shantachuan's arm. Jida knew this man would be a slippery target. He steadied his feet and seized his golden opportunity, turning and lowering his stance to throw Shantachuan over his shoulder and onto the ground. Shantachuan nearly spat blood at the impact. He got back to his feet, but couldn't break free of Jida's grasp. Sharp cracks rang out as his free hand shot out to trade 2 blows with Jida, who warded them off with sheer brute force. Jida wasn't meticulous in his study of martial arts and didn't want to waste more effort on Shantachuan. As he parried the blows, he sensed Shantachuan had already abandoned Avalanche. The instant Shantachuan sprang up again, he swung his hammer. The hammer smashed into a tree trunk. But he'd used too much force with this blow. He couldn't pull it back out. Shantachuan was slightly shorter than his assailant. As he looked up, his pitch-black eyes locking onto Jida, Jida heard the crack of something snapping. Long before he identified the sound, he sensed the acute danger. He abandoned his hammer. Before he could make another move, Shantachuan was striking out with unfathomable speed and power. This time, he was much faster than before. And though he had been planning this since the beginning, luring Jida into a false sense of security, Jida suddenly suspected Shantachuan wasn't injured at all, that his frailty before had been an act. But Jida was out of chances to think. Hot blood spewed from his neck, spraying Shantachuan's face. Jida gurgled. Even in his last moment, all he felt was disbelief. He shifted his sluggish gaze and met a pair of impossibly deep eyes. Shantachuan seemed to remember something. Lowering his expressive eyes slightly, he said to Jida in an amiable tone, "A warm welcome to our guests." The moment the words were out, Jida toppled to the ground, half a broken paintbrush sticking out of his throat. Ding Tao was badly shaken when Shantachuan dropped the packet of candy into his hand. He caught it in a daze. The oil paper was red with blood, the scarlet having seeped all the way through. Okay, let's go over my notes. Whew, this was quite the interesting little tale. So it's crazy. I really want to talk about what we just read, but I'm going to go all the way back to chapter 162, Trade Market. Freak. So first off, I just want to say that I love Xiao Triet and Shantachuan's meeting. It was just so beautiful, so nice. I loved every little piece of it. I don't know what to say about it. It just warmed my heart so freaking much. And then when we get to page 168, I was like, Nanjo, you cannot be talking like this, sweetie. Because of course, Xiao Triet was like, oh, you came to see my father. And he was like, that's just something I'm doing along the way. My heart is all here. I was like, Monjo. So anyway, we move forward, and basically, Li Bei no longer has access to the granaries in Jueshi, right? And so here's the new possible idea that Zhao Hui mentioned that Jiming is considering, and that is making a new supply camp behind the second sand camp to help border camp and meet frontline needs. Then there's also this whole thing of someone in Chudu is clearly feeding Amur intel, which is helping him greatly. And then I have a little note on page 172 where I loved the paragraph. It's the opening paragraph on that page explaining, like describing the look of Shen Zichuan, you know, just saying how he was like a portrait limned with brilliant colors. Like the base was pure white and there were delicate hues of his features so ravishing they held the viewer in thrall. It was like you don't dare look away, you know, but at the same time, looking too long gives you a chill. And it's not an oppressive coldness. It just sends a race up one's spine. That was amazing. And it wasn't something you got an indication of in advance. And by the time you realized it, the viewer sensed danger and shied away from his cutting brilliance. Could that be described any better? I don't think so. So then we go forward, and Xiao Fangshu is trying to figure out how to sit in front of Shen Zichuan, which I thought was hilarious. As soon as the curtain was lifted, he was like, sitting up, ramrod straight. Wait, no, okay, that's too unnatural. Let me put my hands on my knees. Okay, so I can appear more stern and imposing. And I was like, sir. And you guys should see this picture. Him and Zuo Tianqiu looking all stern and stuff. It's so funny. But anyway, we move forward, and Shen Zichuan wants access to Li Bei's roads. And he also wants to be part of the trade market because this will give him the ability to like enter and exit at will, essentially, him and his men. And he's like, Li Bei can inspect our grain and choose how you want it to be delivered, okay? And he just wants to get roads that run through the northeastern territories of Great Zhou. So then once we get to the next chapter 163, Boat on a River, we have Shen Zichuan offering Zhongbo to be a stand-between for Li Bei from Qidong. Yeah, basically. And he wants to, he can purchase grain from Jueshi, you know, unlike Li Bei, and then he can provide it, you know, so good deal, cool. He also wants to build a cavalry at Chasha River, which is currently weakened. It's open. It's exposed. So, yeah, that would be something interesting. And then we learned that the reason that Duanzhou fell was not necessarily because of, you know, the traitory that happened, but more so because they did not have a high vantage point to see the enemy coming. And they, when the enemy arrived, could not outrun the enemy. So that was really the problem. They didn't have a high vantage point. They didn't have falcons. They didn't have a watchtower. And that's something, you know, that is needed. But he's planning to, like, I love that Xiao Chuye speaks up for him. You know, his dad is like, nah, this ain't good. We can't help, blah, blah, blah. And Xiao Chuye is like, I think this is a great idea. And ultimately, like, Shen Zichuan's plan is to make assassins. So he's given permission by Daddy Xiao. But he also says, your men cannot enter Li Bei. If they do, I will kill them and you. Okay, Daddy, that's fine. You don't have to kill anybody, all right? So then I also have a note on page 183 where Zuo Tianqiu is basically saying, you know, why are you willing to make a deal with Shen Zichuan if you clearly, like, you don't trust him, for real? Not all the way. You think he's too dangerous. And he says, my son has made himself into a lock. My note says, and Shen Zichuan is the key. Period. I don't think I need to expound on that. So then when we move forward to the next chapter, Sunrise. Listen, Xiao Chuye, You can't just keep saying, oh, how I love you. What are you doing to me when you say this? You're not even talking to me. It makes me so excited every time he's talking to Shantatuen and he's like, oh, how I love you. And it's the oh. It's the oh, how. Not just I love you, but the oh, how I love you. It's like adding those two extra words really changes it, you know? It's like, let me explain the level, the magnitude of my love, even though it's not explained, but oh, how I love you versus just I love you. And then he said it again. I was just like, sir, I get it. You love Shantatuen. Yes. A lot. But you're messing me up. And so, of course, I absolutely loved this chapter of them and their lovemaking. Beautiful, perfectly written. It's just like explicit, but not. Like, no, detailed, but not explicit, maybe. I think I will say, you know, and then we get, y'all, I had to re-record because my reaction, I felt like it would take away from the mood. So I pulled it out and re-recorded it. But on page 189, y'all, I was not expecting Shantatuen to be like, ah, yeah, Tsu'an, oh, how I love you. When I tell you, I lost it. I lost it so freaking much. And the crazy thing is, just earlier yesterday, I was on TikTok and came across this part in the audio drama, but I didn't listen to all of it. I just heard the like, ah, yeah, Tsu'an. And I was like, I don't know what's happening, but I feel like I shouldn't be listening to this. And so, because I was like, I don't remember this. And so I stopped. And now I can go back and listen. But that was so monumental. My heart. I'd made squilly noises and everything in Discord chat. Y'all, that was everything. I wish y'all could hear my original reaction, but I already deleted it and everything. But I was squilly McSqueal pants over here because what? And then after that, you know, the next day they go to see the sunrise. Oh my God. They go see the sunrise. And I just thought it was interesting, you know, it was going through Shanzatuan's, you know, thoughts before they had sex and whatnot about how he didn't tell anyone about his plans to make his assassins, basically. And then when it's talking about it again, it says, you know, a unit like this was a blade that would kill without restraint. There was a darkness in that mirrored the other side of Shanzatuan, or would, if it wasn't for Xiaochuya. And if you all remember, Xiaochuya has always represented the light for Shanzatuan. So I just think that's so beautiful. Oh my God. And then I just loved it again when he was like, Xiao Zi'an. I was like, I don't know. Every time both of them say each other's names, and like every time Xiaochuya says Lanzhou, every time Shanzatuan says Aya or Tsu'an, and then every time Xiaochuya says, oh, how I love you, your girl needs a fan. That's all I can say. I need a fan really bad. And so then at the end of the chapter, I love that Xiaochuya is like, hey, you can do whatever you want. As long as I'm here, you'll never fall. I was like, you're so romantic. Oh my God. So then when we move to Frostfall, which now we know why this is the name of the chapter, because at first I'm thinking, okay, snow. We're talking about snow in this chapter. Not quite. Even though snow came, you know, at some point or whatever. But in this chapter, I absolutely love the horse name, but I want to say that I absolutely love their horses. What's the word I'm looking for? The switch of their horses. One is all black with a patch of white and the other is all white with a patch of black. I love how they complement each other that way. It's just really symbolic in my mind. Anyway, and it's, it was beautiful and intelligent and even more lively than Snowcrest. I was like, ooh, beautiful and intelligent like its owner. Hey. So anyway, we have Zuo Qianqiu talking to Daddy Xiao about finding this Yidang person who is apparently unpredictable and hard to find. And he's a master. And because this is the first time I've seen the word venerable in here, so we know he's some hot stuff, right? But it's possible that he can help Shen Zichuan, maybe even heal Shen Zichuan. Maybe, hard to say. But, I won't get my hopes up on that. But still, just like, maybe, possibly, hopefully. If not 100%, at least like 80. Because I feel like Shen Zichuan's not even at 80. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and say 85%. We want him to be a B+, okay? So then, with the knowledge of just like the deterioration of his health, I love that we get to see Daddy Xiao being a daddy to Shen Zichuan. He's like letting him have his milk. I was like, oh, yay. He's like, milk makes strong bones, as they say, even though, that's whatever. Humans should not be drinking the milk of animals, but that's my personal opinion. I'm not saying it's wrong or anything, but so then we have Fei Sheng trying to figure out how in the world he is going to ingratiate himself with Xiao Chuye. Meanwhile, Xiao Chuye is like, wherever my man is, you better be there. In other words, you better be there to protect him or you die first in doing so, So I loved it. Then we move forward and we have Feng Quan. I asked during the reading, but sir, how did you escape the well? I thought I already sent you down there. I thought you were gone. Apparently not. So now there's this interesting peek into the dynamic of Feng Quan and Li Jianting, who is, the girl that was raised essentially and taught by Xue Xiuzhuo. I don't have anything to say about that. I just mentioned it and we'll see where things go. So moving forward, yes, the horse name is Frostfall. Perfect snow crest Frostfall. Yas. So as they're heading back, gosh, it is raining so hard. I don't know if y'all can hear it, but anyway, when they're returning back, Shen Zichuan, he looks in the direction of where Duanzhou is, and there are no relay stations because they were all abandoned to fight Biansha. And so I'm thinking that even though it wasn't mentioned, that Shen Zichuan probably has thoughts on that, if there's something that can be done. But anyway, I mean, they're all just fighting, but whatever. So then there are some tracks that appear. Dun, dun, dun. And the question is, who do these tracks belong to? Possibly Biansha horsemen transporting goods. But according to Fei Sheng, it's like the goods have to be heavier than grain. So then we move forward to the next chapter, Liu'er. And yes, it's possible that the Biansha has, this is before we get to the point that they do, it's possible that they have some forgotten armaments. And I was not happy when I read that sentence because I remember the forgotten armaments in Chudu that Xiao Chuye wanted. And remember, he wanted to get the blueprint for it. And he even said, making a tiger with the blueprint of a cat or something like that. I don't want them to have it because I remember those were firearms, to be specific, but it doesn't mean that there weren't more. And so just so you all who don't know, armaments are weapons equipment in current times like tanks or missiles, firearms, those types of things. And then we get into more of them a little later. I'll talk about those. But the Biansha horsemen got to Mount Luo, basically, and turned everyone there into transport slaves, is what I'm going to call them. And the Biansha have siege engines. These are designed to destroy fortifications such as walls, gates, towers, etc. I find this very concerning. These are AKA breach makers. And then there's something called the ballista, which is basically a large engine. These are all large, right? An engine that is kind of acting as a crossbow, and you can launch bolts or stones to destroy fortifications, ships, troops, etc. And yeah, I'm just really concerned. So then we have Liu'er, who is about to die. It's all I can say. He tried to run, and now he's like, why did I run? He's about to die. But then next thing you know, the cavalry shows up, and I was kind of upset because when I was reading the chapters about Fei Xiong and his new commandery friend, the brigade commander, I was like, oh, he's got a little friend. That's good. That's nice. Psych. Never mind. He does not. And I am highly concerned about the weaponry that they have to fight against the Bianxia horsemen. This is terrifying. Extremely terrifying. And this is a new squad of the Bianxia horsemen that has never before been seen. Very problematic. And we have this formidable Jida. Look, he completely destroyed the brigade commander's head. He was about to destroy Fei Xiong. And then there's Ding Tao and Xiong. What do I call them? The monkey bear duo, Li Xiong and Ding Tao. They're going up against him. And it's not until the end when Shen Zichuan joins the fray and tricking him into thinking he's super weak, which, I mean, whatever. And he ends up killing him with the paintbrush. Bruh. Okay. It took way too many people to kill this man, and I am extremely concerned. I'm still, and like the battle's not even over, right? Because the others are still fighting. This was just focusing on this Jida character. So I'm concerned. I am highly concerned. But outside of that, I don't have anything else to say. I don't have anything else to say about the story. The only other things I do have to say are, guess what? We are slightly over halfway done. There are 418, technically 19, but it's literally like 3 lines, 418 pages in this volume. And we are going to be starting up next time on page 221. So just a little bit over half. Isn't that exciting? Yes, I'm very excited. Very, very, very excited. I'm feeling the momentum as I'm reading these chapters. So hopefully I can have them done before I go on my break so y'all can have a little shum. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, please let me know your thoughts and reactions in these chapters. I would love to hear them. And that's pretty much it. Have a good day or night, and wo einehmen. If it's raining where you are and it's night, I hope it soothes you to sleep.